Welcome to the GenX Experience, the podcast that celebrates the unique journey of 80s kids navigating midlife. I'm your host, Blythe Alperin. Each episode, my guests and I will share with you the unique differences that define our generation and how we are navigating those differences in the real world. Join me for laughs, insights, and a sense of community. Let's embrace the GenX Experience together. Welcome back to the GenX Experience, and this is episode, I think 32, 33, 32, something like that. Today we are continuing our conversation of Gen Xers who grew up as only children. As you know, a previous episode, I talked to my siblings about growing up with me and how amazing I am. No, but really sharing our perspective on growing up, together, and the importance of having someone in your life that you can, just be yourself with and is there for you no matter what. And today I have a really great conversation with Craig Fitzgerald, who I met on TikTok because I had posted a video, which I need to include in the show notes here, asking for Gen Xers to talk about their siblings or growing up an only child. And while some of the responses were a little depressing, Craig responded that he'd love to be on the podcast and talk about what it was like growing up as an only child. So before we get into that really fun conversation, let me share a little bit about my guest. Craig Fitzgerald is a writer and editor in the suburbs of Boston. He's an automotive editor at Drive with a focus on advanced safety and semi-autonomous technologies. He was the editor of Hemmings Sports Exotic Car, as well as the editor-in-chief at NPR's CarTalk.com. That is awesome. And also he is on TikTok. I will include that because he does a lot of videos about cars. So if you are interested in that or just want to learn more about cars in general, because I think knowledge is power, be sure to look into the show notes. And so without further ado, let's get into my conversation with Craig. Thank you for joining me, Craig, today to talk about growing up as an only child. Because thankfully you were the one person I think that responded to my TikTok that had a positive thing to say. Like everyone else was so doom and gloom that I was like, did I have a special childhood that I just didn't know about?
So are you an only child too?
I'm not. I have a brother and a sister.
Okay.
I'm the oldest of three. Yeah.
Yeah. So, my experience as a kid was, I didn't even think about it really. It was obvious to me that, obviously I didn't have brothers and sisters, but I spent my entire days were spent with friends who had big families. So they all almost universally kind of took me in, all of these. So I had a kind of interesting, childhood where the school year, I grew up in Wilmington, Massachusetts, just half an hour outside of Boston. But in the summer, my parents had a trailer in Maine, in southern Maine. So we would go up there. So would go up there mostly for the summer, weekends, vacations, all that. And I had more friends in Maine than I had at home, and as a matter of fact, one of those kids that I grew up with ended up being the best man at my wedding. Like we've been friends for years, and his family in particular, he was one of four kids. So, and they lived in this tiny little trailer. The four of them, they were like sleeping outside. They were like, it was crazy, but it was awesome. He had three sisters. They adopted me, basically. His parents took me in. And so I never really felt like I didn't have siblings. I just really felt that way. But I would get to go home and it would be quiet and I had my own stuff and I never had to fight anybody for anything. So my experience was kind of great. I didn't really think about it until my dad died 30 years ago. And then it became obvious that okay, now all of the responsibility for your remaining parent is on you. And now 30 years later, my mom's 96. She'll be 96 in October. And it's a lot. It really is. And this has become, and it's very selfish on my part, where Yeah, I wish I had somebody to share the load with, and I don't. But that's okay. You know, like we're managing through that, and I think that was, you know, what was so great for me growing up was just other people being around, no matter where I was.
Yeah, no, that's nice. And like my sis, I already interviewed my sister and brother, and that was one of the things my sister was talking about. She's like, even if you don't have siblings, have someone in your life that you can go through things. Because you're right, like taking care of parents. I've lost both my parents, and it happened within a few. Like it was from 2015 to 2020, like just 5 years of just awfulness.
Sorry.
And thank you. And if I didn't have my siblings, like, so I understand what you're feeling, because it's like a very, when you're dealing with your parents and they get older,
Yeah.
you know, they sort of become a kid and
Yeah.
they're stubborn.
Oh my God. It's literally like having a toddler. Like at this point, like she falls down a lot, you know, just like, you know, and she's now like now kind of into some light dementia. So I'm having to, you know, so it is very much like having another kid. So yeah, going through that is definitely it's definitely a challenge for sure.
Yeah. And a lot of people in our generation are going through that. We're in that,
Oh
like,
yeah.
the sandwich generation, part of our, you know, generation where a lot of people are taking care of elderly parents and
Yeah.
raising kids. And it's, you know, being an adult is highly overrated. And
Big time. Big
it's,
time.
yeah, I don't, somebody should have warned us, because,
Yeah.
well, I guess if they had, nobody would want to be an adult
That's exactly right. That's
because
exactly right.
it sucks.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I mean, it definitely is not. y- y- It's not something I expected. That's for sure. You know, this part of it is
yeah.
definitely something that I didn't expect. I, you know, and you know, love my mom. Did not expect her to be 96. Like I said to her a couple of weeks ago, like literally, you are the oldest person I have ever known in my life. Like, you know, my grandmother who really hung in there, she was 89 when she died. She like as a you know 19, 20 year old, it felt like she was 1,000 years old.
Right.
And my mom's 10 years past that. So it's like we just didn't anticipate this. So it's a whole different thing. And there's some kind of really interesting things about it, especially for me. Like I've had to learn a lot, which is hopefully going to help my kids, because I don't want them to have the experience that I've had.
Yeah.
So it's a whole different thing.
So speaking of that, how many kids do you have?
I have a 21-year-old daughter and I have a 16-year-old son.
Okay. And
Uh,
did you like decide, because I was an only child, I wanted to have more than one kid, or you just didn't think about that, or?
no, not really. I mean, it was so funny. Like my wife came from. She had two brothers. She has two brothers, and you know, she had that experience, and I loved her brothers, and you know, our decision to have kids, both of them were accidents, you know, so it wasn't like we really planned for any of this. It's really funny. Like I had, we were recently married. We had owned a house for 2 or 3 years in Massachusetts, and I got offered a job in Vermont to edit a magazine. And my wife was like, we're out of here. Like, let's go. Let's just do it. So we sold our house. We moved up to Vermont, and there was a span of about a month where she was selling the house, and you know, and we the literally the day she moved up there, she was like, oh, I'm pregnant. And so it was like, wow, okay, like this is a whole thing. So yes, to answer long answer to your question, no, we didn't there was no sort of like, oh, you know, we didn't have, you know, I didn't have siblings, so blah blah blah. In fact, you know, there's 5 years between our kids,
Mhm.
and I think we had anticipated that our daughter was going to be it, and that would have been fine. I mean, I think that would have been fine for both of us, so or all three of us. I think if you asked my daughter, she probably still would be fine with it.
Yeah, I mean, as being the oldest of 3, there were sometimes I was like, "Can it just be quiet in here? Can I
Yeah.
just have my own space?" And, even though my sister and I are 16 months apart and my brother was a surprise 4
Yeah.
years later, I would be like, "Oh, I don't watch cartoons because only babies watch cartoons," or I don't, and it really was because I just wanted my own quiet space and my own time alone because they were
Yeah.
always there, and I'm glad they're here, but, like, sometimes I'm like, "I would like to kill both of you. You're annoying." And so,
I
you
can
know,
imagine.
yeah,
Yeah, and whenever I felt that at one of my friends' houses, I would just go home. You know? So I think what happened to me, and I mean, I'm an editor, been a writer for, since I was in college. And I think that experience as a kid gave me a very interior life. I had a lot of things going on in my head that weren't coming out. It was just this little environment that I had. So I think it gave me a very active imagination too, and kids who have siblings have that too. But I think I thought an awful lot without vocalizing a lot of things.
mhm.
So I
You had a
think
lot of
that,
alone time.
yes,
Yeah,
correct, correct. So, it never one time did I think growing up, oh man, I wish I had, you know, brothers and sisters, and it just wasn't a thing. It just didn't seem like a thing to me. And I had a good relationship with my parents. Like we would do a lot of things together, but it was also like, this is the Gen X experience was very different from what it is today, where it was like I didn't see my parents most of the day. I was talking to my
right.
son about this yesterday, as a matter of fact, and he's 16, he's got his learner's permit, and he's like, well, like when I get my license, like, am I allowed to just like get in the car and go places? And I was like, Harry, I don't care. Like I never saw my parents. Like from the time I was 16, I slept in their house. We were like roommates. So it's a totally different experience for them than it was for me.
And a lot of kids you hear don't wanna learn to drive, whereas, like, I remember every one of my friends, like, the minute we got our license, it was like, "Thank God, freedom." Like, we could go and do not that we weren't doing whatever we want because our parents were all working, but you had wheels, so you could, if one of your
I
friends did, it was like it was the biggest deal, and now kids are like, "Meh."
I didn't feel like my life really kicked off until I got my driver's license. And I remember saying that to somebody. I remember distinctly saying this to somebody as I was working in this little supermarket in Maine. And I said to somebody, man, my life really isn't going to get started until I get my license. And they're like, oh, that's so sad. Why would you think that way? Blah, blah, blah. I was like, you have no idea. Like, I just want to be off and be able to go anywhere. I don't even care if I'm going anywhere. I'm just going to drive around. And I used to do that on a bicycle, but I could get a lot further with the car. It really was crucial to me. And I don't think and it's because what else was there?
Right.
There was no competition. I had books. I had 3 channels on television. Like, it wasn't like I had an Xbox or a computer or all of this kind of stuff that satisfied me at home. So I was gone.
Yeah, I mean, TV wasn't that interesting,
Yeah.
and yeah, it was just like, "Let's go, let's do stuff," and, it's interesting that kids aren't that excited. I mean, granted, being at home for them, they have, you know, technology at their fingertips. They can they can talk to their
Right.
friends, while they're playing a video game. I mean, I remember, like, running home and getting on the phone to talk to my friends and my parents being like, "You just saw them." I'm like, "But we couldn't talk about
Right.
anything because we were in school." So,
Right. Right.
yeah.
And the car thing, it became my career. It became like that's what I do. I, write about cars and write about the business and all of that kind of stuff. And it was critically important to everybody that I knew. I went to a vocational high school, and it's interesting when I drive by the high school that my son goes to. It looks like the parking lot. It looks like any office park in Massachusetts. It's just like everybody's driving Camrys and RAV4s, and My high school, it was like dazed and confused. It was the parking lot was all of the coolest cars you've ever seen. So it was like this whole community thing around this. That's, I think, the difference between now and then is like that was the culture. The culture is
Mhm.
not that anymore. It's, there might be a few kids who are interested in that, but it's not pervasive the way it was when I was growing up.
Yeah, I mean, I remember, like, you'd see these old junkers in the parking lots, and no one really
Yeah.
cared what you drove. It was like you
No.
had a car. It didn't
Yep.
matter if it barely barely made it to your destination, and, you'd have your parents' old car,
Right.
or, there'd be some new cars. Like, my parents wouldn't buy us a car, so we got to
Yeah.
use
Oh,
my
everybody
my yeah, my dad's, and it was an Acura Integra, so I'm not complaining,
Yeah.
and the windows were like they went down in an angle, so we all thought we were so cool, but, it was just you had a car, and it was the
Yeah.
freedom that you could go to your friend's house, or like me, because I had siblings, my job was to take them places. I'm like, "I don't care. I get to drive."
Yeah.
That's all that.
So when did you graduate high school? This
92.
92. So that
Yeah.
puts me in like, so I'm 80. I graduated in 86. And at the time, it was like there was this part of my career was editing a magazine about muscle cars of the 60s and 70s. Our generation had those vehicles had a double dip in popularity because they were wildly popular when they were new. And
Mhm.
then they were wildly popular because they were the cars that everybody saw as being cool when we were young people. So, in that, like everything I'm interested in, cars, comedy, music, like books, all of it came from that period. Like there was what was going on in the late 70s and early 80s with, punk rock and disco and all of that kind of stuff. But the music of that period was from 10 years before. And I think it really informed us. And I think when people say like Gen X, they're kind of the new boomers, they kind of are because they were really, our culture was indelibly influenced by things that were going on in the late 60s.
Yeah.
I think we almost lost a little bit of our own culture. Now I've kind of gone back and reappreciated what was actually new when we were kids, but it was different, and I don't know if anybody really had that same experience. Like boomers had their own thing; they had it from the get go, and then kids who grew up just after you did had their own thing and they didn't care at all about what came before, but we did. It was a totally different time to grow up.
Yes, and I think I remember my parents, especially my dad loved music, and we had this like whole setup of a stereo in our house, speakers in their rooms, and he would put on music all the time when we were like getting ready or just to listen to it. So,
Yeah.
and when we were driving in the car, like going on family trips, there would be like occasionally stations that play oldies, which now is our music, but then was like the 50s and the 60s.
Yeah.
And so they introduced us to that. So yeah, I feel like our Gen X really appreciates 50s, 60s, like we appreciate a lot of music from like probably like the 60s till I would say the early 2000s. Now I'm
Yep.
like, this stuff is, I miss, because our music did definitely evolve from the 70s and
For
80s
sure.
and 90s. It was
For
always
sure.
changing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, for me too. So it's kind of interesting. My only cousin who I was close to, my mom had uh, three brothers, but we were only close to one of them. The other two moved away, so I was close to my one set of aunt and uncle, and my cousin who was also an only child, but he was 20 years older than me, and he was my idol growing up. So everything that he thought was cool, like he gave me all his Beatles records, gave me all his Monkees records. It's not as cool now, but it was all his Bill Cosby records, which was the thing that, like I say what you will about that guy, he's awful, but that stuff that came out of that period was great. It was hilarious. And that informed everything that I was really into. So it was coming at me, that definitely was coming at me from a different time,
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
sure.
Comedy albums were
It was a thing.
huge.
It's
Yeah. I
less of
think
a
I
thing now. Yeah.
still have a few of my parents' records from like, and some of the comedy I remember listening to it. I was
Oh,
like,
it's bad.
terrible.
It's terrible. Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah. I mean, it was, that's so, growing up in that period. I think similarly, I'm very influenced by my own kids who will call that stuff out without reservation. Like that's like wildly inappropriate. And I get it. I get it. So I'm really influenced by both ends of the age spectrum. Being around kids, it really kind of wakes you up a little bit.
yeah.
And I have loved being around my kids and being around their friends, and like I am so fortunate that all of the kids that my kids hang out with, they're interesting and funny, and so I get a lot out of that. I really do.
And speaking of your kids, I know there's a little bit of an age difference, but was as growing up as an only child, was it interesting watching them grow up as siblings and kind of seeing how they interacted or how they didn't interact? Or did you ever like witness, the sibling fights that you're like,
Oh
I
my
don't,
God.
yeah.
Like they never really fought. They did their absolute best to ignore each other, like just like that they don't even exist, through from very young age up until very recently. Now, what's the interesting thing is they're starting to turn a little bit. And so day before yesterday, my daughter was off of work. She's driving home. It's 3 in the afternoon. She texts her brother and says, "Hey, I'm driving by the high school. You want me to pick you up?" Like, I never in a million years would have anticipated that circumstance happening, but they are forming a different relationship now, which I think is great. I love to see that.
Yeah.
Um,
Cause your relationship does change as you get
yeah,
older and you're kind of, I don't want to say you kind of get to that adult stage. So you start to relate to things. And then also if, you're like my brother said, he's like, he got to watch my sister and I go through things first. And he had the benefit of our wisdom of going through
yeah,
stuff. I'm
yeah,
like, I would have appreciated that because I just have the oldest child trauma from like having to do
right.
everything first. And then if it wasn't right, my parents are like, you'll be fine. And then they fix it for the rest of them. And I'm left with like needing massive therapy that we didn't really talk about back then.
Yeah, I know, definitely. My daughter keeps trying to convince me to go, which I'm sure I should, but I never have, and I really should. It would be helpful to me, especially now, the way that this is, like that. This is therapeutic to me, having these conversations about what it was like. But no, it's they actually kind of grew up almost as if they were only children because of the age difference, and because boys and girls are different. I mean, they were raised exactly the same, and I don't know how we got two completely different kids, but they were completely different from birth. They were just totally different people. So it was fascinating to me to see them grow up.
Did you experience any of that when you were hanging out with your friends in the summer that had siblings? Did you like notice the different dynamics between them?
So I had friends who grew up in with two boys, and they were relatively close and close in age, always pretty close to one another, and now they barely talk, which is fascinating to me. Then I grew up with these several sets of or several families that had 4 or 5 kids, and they're all relatively close. They just like my friend that I mentioned, who was the best man at my wedding. His family, his parents are still alive. All of his siblings live within a couple of blocks of each other. So they have this compound. Like, their dad, who was amazing to me, was like my surrogate father. Um, he's older now, still with it and everything. But when he was a little younger, he would be on a riding lawnmower, driving all over town, cutting everybody's grass. It's like they were like the Kennedys. They were like the hillbilly Kennedys. It's so fascinating to me. So it was great to see that, and it was great to see like how my friend Brian, who was the youngest, had three sisters, and how he related to them and how much he loved them. Fought with them all the time also, but loved them deeply. And that is something that, like, I wish I had. I do wish I had that, because and now I didn't really think about it at the time, but now it's like it's a really special relationship that they have.
Yeah, it makes me sad. Like in my TikTok video, the responses where people are like, "Oh, I don't talk to my siblings anymore,"
Yeah.
and my sister has a few friends where they don't talk to their siblings or they're not getting along, and it makes me sad because when you're growing up, you're kind of like you're there, you're in the
Yeah.
house, you have, but when you're older, and you don't live in the same place, you have to make the effort
Yeah.
to talk to each other and spend time together, and it's not always easy because sometimes people marry people who don't like the family, and you're like,
Yep.
we came first, but
Right.
it is something, it's a special relationship, but it's like any relationship. If you don't kind of work at it a little bit and put the effort in, you can just let it fall by the wayside.
For sure. For sure. And so those things are all optional for me. All of these people that I've become close with in my life, it's an option for me. I don't have to be in those relationships. I don't have to go to Christmas and see all these people. So it's on me to maintain those relationships. Um, Much more so than I think, if you grow up with somebody who's in your house and you're going to see them all the time. That was my wife's experience, having two brothers. I think she was closer to her middle brother when she was growing up. Her older brother was 8 years older, so he was basically out of the house by the time she was aware of anything. And um, their relationship is kind of holiday based at this point. I think she texts, her one brother, and they, make sure they say happy birthday and all that kind of thing, but they're not super close. However, when bad things happen, they are there for each other. Like, when my mother-in-law passed away 5 years ago or so, it's like everything came together for that period, and everybody worked everything out. That was interesting to see, because you could see in other families how that fractures money fractures things,
Yeah.
and it didn't with them. I mean, it was just like a handshake deal. Like, look, we're going to split things evenly, and that's the way it's going to be. And everybody was cool with it. Um, Very positive, and I think, helpful to each other, which I really appreciated.
Yeah, my sister and brother were like when my mom got sick and my dad, we were just on the same page.
Yeah.
We would have calls without that, like talking about things. I remember we had a call with my mom's doctor because we were like, I don't think she's telling us everything, and we needed to know stuff and
Yeah.
stuff we didn't want to ask her.
Yeah.
And yeah, and when they passed, like there was no fighting. Everyone was so kind to each other. But I know,
Yeah.
some people aren't like that, where like parents have to be like, this is what you're getting and this is what that person's getting, or the money gets in the way and they just start
Yeah, and
fighting.
even
And
treatment, like the idea that you would say, "Geez, my mom's not able to live by herself anymore. We need to figure out what the next step is to get her into some kind of an assisted living situation." Siblings will fight about that, and that's the bonus for me at this point, is like, I don't have to
right.
deal with anybody. I have power of attorney for her. We have and by the way, if you have older parents, make sure you get all that stuff nailed down wills and all of that kind of stuff, because it's been hugely helpful to me. Like, I have all her banking stuff that I take care of for her, and like there's never any question. So that's the positive on that end. I don't have to check in with anybody. I'm just doing what I think is the right thing. And I know that that causes a lot of stress for other people.
Yeah.
So I'm glad I don't have to deal with that.
Yeah, I mean that is the one benefit. Yes, you're going through it alone, but you don't have to
Yep.
question. You don't have to be like, so we want to do this, and then your
I'm
sibling
not
go, we're
getting
not doing that.
yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just yeah,
Yes.
because
Yeah.
again,
And,
dealing
if you have the
parents.
right relationship with your siblings, that doesn't happen.
Yeah,
Everybody rows in the same direction, but for me, it's just been that has been relatively easy. So if I have a question for her doctor, I pick up the phone, talk to him directly. They know that I have durable power of attorney so that they can talk to me, and we just get things done, which is kind of nice.
yeah, because it's not a fun situation.
Oof.
Like we said earlier, they become toddlers,
It's
and
it's
it's
really stressful. It really
yeah,
is. Like, it's the thing in my life right now that causes me the most stress. My kids, not an issue. I mean, they're doing great. My own life, work, love my job, enjoy what I do. If it falls apart, I'm getting pretty close to the finish line here anyway. So, it's not, it doesn't cause me any stress. This does for sure. So,
yeah,
but it's also like when you have kids that are in, uh, like, I remember saying this to people. I had two kids in, one was in daycare, the other one was in like an early morning and afternoon kind of a situation that we had to pay for. And I said to somebody, it's like, I could have a Bentley for what I'm paying for these kids for summer camps. Like, I literally could pay for a Bentley, but the way they get you is like, okay, this is a short period of time. You're going to do this for 4 years or whatever it is, like college. It's like, yeah, it's going to be a fortune, but it's only 4 years. And that's how they do it to you. And it's kind of similar with this. It's like, well, there's an end somewhere, you know? So it's just, I need to kind of figure, and I know that that sounds callous, but it is what it is. I mean, I've been looking out for this woman for 30 years now. So she was very independent and on her own, and, did very well up until the pandemic. And then things started going off the rails. So it's been a good 5 years where, you know, just having to manage all this stuff. It's tough. It definitely is.
yeah. And even if we saw our parents taking care of their parents, we were so young that we didn't really. We're like, well, this seems kind of stress, but they wouldn't really tell us how stressful it was, and you would see
Yeah.
things and be like, okay, grandma needs to chill out, but
So it's funny. It's funny that you mentioned that, because my parents never did
no.
that. My father, um, his mother was my only living grandparent. Because this is the other thing, is my parents are significantly older than my entire cohort. Their parents. Most of them were like Vietnam veterans. My dad was a World War II veteran, so it was like a whole different thing. And when he was growing up, his mom got divorced very early. So she got remarried, and my grandmother lived with his stepsister. And she was a very nice woman, took care of my grandmother. My dad didn't have to deal with this at all. My mom didn't have to deal with it at all. They basically they did what they wanted to do. So I would never say this to my mom, but like, you didn't have to deal with this at all. Like, you got to pass on all of this. So it's it, and my wife's parents both were very independent and just passed away, very suddenly, the two of them. So it was like, I don't really have anybody to share this experience with. Um, so I that's where I think I probably should go to some kind of therapy to talk about it, because it definitely does cause some stress in my life.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I should have been prepared a little bit because my grandmother, my dad's mother, was loved her, but real interesting character. She stayed with us once because she tripped over a speed bump at her apartment complex and broke like her shoulder, but
Oh, yeah.
didn't bother to tell my dad. And then like she had to have surgery, so she had to stay with us.
Yeah.
And she was driving all of us crazy because we had
Yeah.
like I grew up in Florida, so we had like tile floor. She wouldn't pick up her feet, so it was like it sounded like
Yeah.
Jason or Friday the 13th and all the
Yeah.
time. And just we had to take her to doctor's appointments, and she was just. But
How
I,
old were you? How old were you at the
I
time?
was in high school, so I think I
Oh,
like my siblings. I will joke about remember grandma with her, but like I didn't remember that when my parent because it was just you're like I'm like oh my mother was fine one day and now she has stage 4 colon cancer. You go
yeah.
into a different mode, but yeah, it yeah it's hard to prepare for any of that stuff whether you have siblings or not. It's just
Yeah. Yeah.
nobody
There's no good.
yeah
So, actually, this other friend of mine, John, very similar situation to me. His parents were older. His mom's in assisted living now. And he has two siblings, but they're both just a little bit too far away to take care of, any of their mom's stuff. So it's all on John. So he's very much in the same position as I am, where he's not asking them a lot of questions either. He's just doing what he thinks he should do, and then every now and then one of his brother will, well, what are we doing this for? And he's like, look, man, like if you're interested, by all means, take over. Yeah, but for the moment, I'm the one managing this relationship. So it's challenging and it's stressful, and we all love our parents. Like that's the thing. It's like, but it gets old. That's for sure. Yeah,
It does, yeah, and I think, I remember, like, my mom, because she was still, sound mind and I was helping, she's like, "You need to get on with your life," and I'm like, "But you need help." Even though my
yeah.
dad was there, he was starting to show early signs he had a rare form of dementia, but then I'd
Oh,
be like
yeah,
yeah, then she'd be like, "But I'm so glad you're here," and, or she'd text me sometimes, like, she fell once and she was out getting treatment but without us and like, don't tell your dad or so I was like you need me here and I'm fine doing that
yeah,
because you took care of us and if whatever and as horrible as it was I'm thankful for the time but
yeah,
yeah I mean there's a lot of things that we when you're growing up you don't want to think about and you don't want to deal with and then you become an adult and you're like no one prepared me but if you think back to it like would you would have had a class where like your parents are going to die someday and here's how it's going to suck like no we all
well,
would have run out screaming
yeah. If I was when I was younger, there's no way I would have wanted anything to do with that.
no
And it's like that's not going to happen to me anyway. But now what I'm trying to do is hopefully lay some groundwork for my kids so that maybe I'm not going to be like this. Yeah. It's like I want them to be aware of what my experience is so that they can not only make better decisions but tell me, like, hey, dementia's a whole different thing. It's like she doesn't there's some days when she kind of doesn't know what day it is,
yeah
but the it would still be I would love to have the relationship with her where I could just say, hey, you got to stop. And we never had that relationship. You know what I mean? It's like
hmm
it's still a very much a 50s era parent and child relationship for me, even though that wasn't my experience. It was like that's kind of what it was like. So it's hard to be direct with her.
yes
I think that so I hope that my kids are direct with me. That's for sure.
yeah because even though we always say Gen X we're feral like you didn't speak to your parents in
No,
certain ways because if you did you would not be here right now or they'd
no,
knock you into next week or so we kept a lot of it in and I saw a
right.
video the other day like this woman was saying this is what we did with our parents and it's just a woman being silent in her room like giving them the finger and doing and I'm like yes that's what
Yeah,
we did because
yeah.
we knew that if we did not the consequences were not great
So interestingly, my dad was abused as a kid. His father was a violent alcoholic, and to his mother and to him and his brother. So as a consequence, he was like, I'm never doing that, and never did. Never. Like, I can count the number of times he really got mad at me about on one hand, and he never hit me. My mom, on the other hand, tuned me up regularly. And that relationship now, that that's still in the back of my mind, you know?
Yeah.
So it's something that I hope that kids don't have to deal with now. Because it's not pleasant. It really isn't to think about that, you know.
Yeah, I wonder what we will be like when we are, old. I don't like, are we gonna go back to like reverting to being crazy? And they joke like, oh, all of our nursing homes are going to be playing, Nirvana and Depeche Mode, or like just a range of music, probably the Monkees and the Beatles and everything. Like, what are we going to be like? Because we're I feel like we're aging a lot better than other generations before us, but are we going to be stubborn? Are we going to be?
Not to be real dark about this, but I think a lot of us are going to choose an alternate route when it's because we've experienced this. Like, our parents did not, because their parents died in their 70s, at
Yeah.
best. They just, so I think a lot of us have really seen what this experience is like, and it's like, why do I want to do this? Why would I want to do this? And
Yeah.
I think it's totally different when you actually get there. But I think that a lot of people are going to look for alternate routes.
Yeah.
um,
I mean, if I
because
get dementia, like my brother and I talked about, I don't know if my sister was in the conversation, but we're like, if we got what dad have, we're going somewhere where we can.
fly me to Switzerland.
Yeah,
Like,
I'm not going to
yep,
live that way.
nope,
Because I don't want to do that to my family, really. Because
nope.
at some point you don't know what's going. And it's horrible watching someone that you love become a completely different person, and you're worrying about them all the time, and that's not how they would want to live. So yeah, no,
Exactly.
I'll go wherever. Take a pill, go to
Yeah,
sleep,
yeah.
totally fine.
Right, right. I think it's just that whole experience, and it's not like I'm saying that people in their 80s and 90s and beyond do not have value. They do. They are fascinating people. But it's the choice, the decision to do something else with your life that I think will be important to people of our age group, much more so than it was for the groups before us. I
Yeah.
think that's going to be a different thing. So
I think so, because we're not just like, oh, I'm old. Like, we are not accepting certain things. Like, as women with, dealing with perimenopause and menopause, like, we're speaking up because, like, this is ridiculous and these
yeah,
symptoms are horrible. And we're not going to just lay down and just accept that we're women and we're older.
right.
And I think our generation, we're stubborn and scrappy.
I think about my dad at 57, right? I mean, I this morning ran 5.5 miles. I do that regularly. Like, and I know a lot of people my age do that. Nobody in my parents' generation was doing that at that age. Like, they did no exercise. It was by accident. And I think purposely we're out doing these kinds of things because we hopefully are trying to improve our situation as we get older. I see a lot of people my age, in the gym, and you would never see that years ago. So I think it's
It's
just a
true.
whole different way of looking at the end of your life, and or the second half of your life, I guess. And I've actually had this conversation with my uncle, who also died at 96. I said to him at one point, it was like, and he was a World War II veteran, landed on Normandy Beach, the whole 9 yards. It was like, you must not have thought you were going to reach the age of 25, let alone 90. And he said, it's absolutely true. Like, that's why they smoked. That's why they drank. That's why they ate terribly. They took chances. They did dumb things because they thought they weren't going to make it. And even the people who were at home, like my mom, they were dying of, childhood diseases and all this kind of stuff. Like, my mom had every disease going. It was like scarlet fever. You'd be in the hospital for a year, and tuberculosis and all this. Like, you didn't think you were going to live this long. No way.
Yeah.
Now I'm betting on it that I'm going to live that long. So it's a whole different way of looking at it.
And especially because as you start to age, even though you're working out and healthy, your body's still falling apart. And like
Absolutely.
there are certain
Absolutely.
I'm fine when I work out. Like I love like doing weights, but then sometimes getting off the couch, I'm like, why does my back hurt? And then getting out of bed in the morning, I'm like, why can't my feet are just not properly working? It like takes me a few minutes to get my feet going. I'm like, this is ridiculous. I can lift heavy weight. I can't walk out of bed. So you have to do stuff, and then you have to have a sense of humor about it because like,
Oh, you definitely
yeah,
do.
your
Like when
body, yeah.
I'm in a half marathon and I'm 8 miles in and some woman pushing a double baby stroller is cruising past me like I have a cinder block chained to me. That's when your sense of humor, that's gonna is what gets you through. Like I'm in a different zone here, you know?
Yeah. And I think, I love watching the stuff online where like, I don't remember why I walked into this room, but I can remember song lyrics from like 40 years ago. I'm like, yes,
Yep,
every day.
for
And,
sure. For sure.
multiple times, sometimes several times in an hour, I'm like, why did I pick up my phone? Why did I do this? And I have to like, and I'm like,
Yep.
oh, just at that stage in my life. And
Yep, for sure.
yeah,
I'm writing that off to just being busy. I have
yes.
a lot of
Yeah.
thoughts.
Yes, I try not to multitask too much because it's not good for us really, but like as you get older, like you can't. No. And also like I'm a writer too, and I have a little
Yeah,
bit of ADD, so I'll be doing something and then my brain starts thinking of other stuff, and I'm like, I don't know what I just read. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm like on autopilot, but I'm somewhere
exactly.
else. So, the joys of being creative, but
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
So we're nearing the end, but let me ask you, is there anything from your childhood growing up, as an only child that you have a fond memory from that time, like when you were, just yourself versus like when you were with your friends and their siblings?
Um, yeah, I mean, I had some really great experiences with my parents. You know, like we enjoyed our time together, and I did really enjoy being left alone to listen to music, and actually television was very important to me, but it wasn't like the sitcoms of the era. I spent a lot of time watching Merv Griffin when I was
Oh my
younger, right?
god.
It was like every D-list celebrity who nobody had heard of in 40 years made their way through Merv Griffin every day. And it
Mhm.
was like it formed the things that I think are funny, the things that I think are interesting, and like I loved it. I really grew up with that. It was kind of my babysitter for a while. So I think I'm so I have a friend of mine who's 70 now, and he will tell people, "Oh, he's only 57, but we went to high school together." Like his brain is from a different era, and it's absolutely true, and it's because of things like that. So that I think I
Mhm.
really enjoyed.
Yeah. Do you think too, because you spent so much time with your parents, that you related to adults
Yeah,
easier yeah.
totally, totally. Yep,
I mean,
yep.
granted, I feel
And
like our generation did that anyways. We had like I remember very distinctly having adult conversations and people like, why are you with the kids? I'm like, well, I find you guys a little more interesting than some of
well,
my
yeah,
brother and sister.
my son said to me yesterday, he's like, "You talk more than anybody I know." Like I will talk to anybody. I don't care. Doesn't matter. Talk to anybody, and he won't do that. Like that's the difference between he and I, is that he's within his own thing. I will be talking to anybody. Doesn't matter to me. And I think
Yeah.
that's because of who I
Being
grew up with and
mhm.
my experience as a kid.
Yeah. Yeah. My dad used to like to talk to people in an elevator just to
Yeah.
which you like no one really talks to each other in an
Nope.
elevator.
Nope.
Occasionally you will, but
No,
he
no
would do it.
boundaries.
Yeah. And we'd be like, Dad, can you please not
Yeah.
talk to these people? You're embarrassing, even though they don't know
Yep.
us. But that's a father's job too. He would tell us that. Like, my job is to embarrass you. And I'm like, well, you're very good at it. Thank you.
I got in an Uber with my daughter one time, and we were going somewhere. I was talking to the Uber driver, and we got out of the car, and she was like, "How do you know him?" I was like, "I have no idea."
But I mean, it's interesting
Right.
to talk. That's one of the reasons
I
I
know,
started
I
the
love it.
podcast was like, even
Yeah,
though I'm an introvert, I love talking to other Gen Xers and like hearing our collective stories. And then also the differences too, depending upon, where you grew up in the generation or where you grew up, geographically. So yeah, it's just fun to have these conversations. And
exactly. Yeah, I really enjoyed this. This was great.
yeah, me too. So thank you so much for doing that. I'm so glad we
Of
like
course.
met on TikTok.
Yeah, yeah,
Social media for the win.
I know.
And I know you do a lot of videos on TikTok. Is that the best place if people want to connect with you?
Yeah,
Is to
yeah. You can follow me on TikTok. It's Fitz Cars, and I do a fair amount of writing for Subaru too.
oh
So
cool,
like I do some content for them. There's a publication called Subaru Drive that I do a lot of writing for. So
awesome. Well, I
that's
will
pretty much
include
where
that
I am.
all in the show notes. And I've watched your videos. I'm like, this is a lot of cards. Like I learned some things because
Oh, good.
yeah, and it does remind. My dad used to be really into cars, and when he grew up in a very small town in Ohio called East Liverpool, and he had friends that they would kind of race cars,
Yeah,
and he would talk about it, and I was like, that sounds kind of fun.
yeah, yeah. It's definitely more than an appliance for me. But I do understand that like most people are just they're just looking to get back and forth to work. Yeah.
Well, I live in Atlanta, so yes, I like
Yes.
would just looking to survive the
Yeah.
highway because people cannot drive here, and it's just it like like we were talking earlier about loving to drive. Like I used to love to just go for a drive, and now I'm like, no,
Yeah. Misery. Yeah.
no, thank you. Thank you again, Craig. It was so great to talk to
Anytime.
you.
Yeah, it was great to talk to you too.
Thank you again to Craig for such a really fun, engaging conversation. I love talking to my fellow Gen Xers, even when we go off on little tangents, but it's just so fun to hear from different people. And I love, because I grew up with siblings, I don't know what it's like to be an only child. I only know what it was like from my friend's perspective. So hearing from Craig talk about, how he had a lot of alone time and really kind of crafted this, imagination, and how he also got to spend time with his friends in the summer who had siblings. So he kind of got to see both dynamics and how being an only child impacts you in your, as you grow up. And just, talking about music. I love talking about music. One of these days we need to do like a whole series on music. I know there are other podcasts that do, but I think it's just fun sometimes to just, reminisce about how Gen X really did listen to a very broad range of music. And I think a lot of us still do. I mean, we have our favorites, but I still love music from the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, of course the 80s and the 90s. And there's some music now that I like, but if am I driving in my car, you know what I'm listening to? 80 station, new wave, and I do listen to alternative because that's just who I am. So thank you again to Craig. It was great to talk to you. All of his information will be in the show notes. Coming up next month, we will be talking about mental health. And then this August, we will be talking to some Gen X influencers. I'm really excited because there's a couple of them that I follow that I just think are fascinating. And I love seeing our generation not be afraid of social media and really creating this interesting following where we're talking about all kinds of things. There may also be a solo episode this month of me sharing some more insight from those who responded to TikTok, my video. We'll see. I don't know. Maybe you guys are sick of hearing from me. Hopefully not. And thank you again to everyone who's been listening to the podcast on all the platforms. I'd love seeing this community grow. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at the Gen X Experience Pod. You can also, if you're on TikTok, I'm on TikTok, Word Woman Creative, and maybe I'll include that in the show notes. You can follow me there because I do post about Gen X related things. Anyway, I will end this podcast the way I end every podcast. My fellow Gen Xers, don't you forget about me because I won't forget about you. Thank you for taking the time to listen to the Gen X Experience. If today's episode resonated with you, please consider sharing it on social media or with a friend. We'll see you back here next time.